My name is Martha, and I am 28. My life now is lines of code on a glowing screen and a rented apartment in the city center, its windows overlooking perpetually noisy, illuminated avenues. But before becoming who I am, I had to travel a long road, its beginning lost in the mists of a childhood overshadowed by an early loss. My mother died when I was 11, leaving in my soul a quiet, unfillable void. After her departure, it was just my father and me, and those 2 years became a time of bitter, yet so necessary, bonding. We were truly close. He was my only support, my entire world, and in my childish faith, I was convinced that I was everything to him, too. But everything changed when Karen crossed his path. They got married just after I turned 13, and she, like a fresh wind, burst into our established life, bringing with her 2 daughters, Madison and Ashley. They were a bit older than me. Madison was 15, Ashley was 14. And from the very minute their suitcases crossed the threshold of our once familiar home, the familiar contours of my world began to blur and distort. Karen immediately, with ruthless efficiency, took the reins into her well-manicured hands. She rearranged the furniture as if setting not just objects, but new priorities, redecorated the rooms, banishing the spirit of my mother from every corner, and established new, alien rules. And my father, my once untouchable hero, agreed to everything without a murmur, dissolving into the shadow of his new wife. Whatever Karen wished was immediately executed, as if she were not a woman, but the ruler of a small kingdom. And in this kingdom, there was suddenly no place for me. I ceased to be a priority, pushed to the sidelines of my own life. The center of the universe, the sun around which my father revolved, became Madison and Ashley. They got new fashionable clothes while I wore hand-me-downs. They boasted about the latest phone models, and I remained silent. But the most painful thing was to see how my father, forgetting about my science fairs, my parent-teacher conferences, enthusiastically attended their dance recitals and volleyball matches. I kept telling myself, whispering this mantra into my pillow at night, that it was just a period of adjustment, that everything would work out, that Dad still loved me. I believed it until the very end. When Madison graduated from high school with pomp, my parents, without batting an eye, paid for her tuition at Yale. The full cost, including room, board, and generous pocket money, a luxurious package unburdened by cares. 2 years later, the same story repeated with Ashley, who got into Stanford. The same unconditional financial support, the same full funding from Mom and Dad, who seemed to be competing in generosity, but only towards them. Finally, it was my turn. I was 18, with a high school diploma earned with honors behind me, years of diligent study, a stack of certificates, and an expectation of justice. I was accepted into a prestigious computer science program, offered a scholarship covering 70% of the cost. Pride and hope flickered in my chest when I asked for help with the remaining 30%. Dad sat me down at the kitchen table, the very one where we used to have breakfast together, and his face was serious. "Martha, you're an adult now," he said, and there wasn't a drop of paternal tenderness in his voice. "You need to learn independence. You must pay the remaining tuition yourself." I stared at him, not believing my ears. "But you paid for Madison and Ashley," I exhaled, feeling a lump form in my throat. "In full." "That was different," he cut me off, looking somewhere past me. "Their circumstances were different." "What circumstances?" My voice trembled. "They had full funding. I only need help with 30%. He just shook his head, and in his eyes I read not paternal care, but cold alienation. "You'll thank me later. It will toughen you up." And my character was tempered. The college years turned into an endless race for survival. I worked 2 jobs, nights at a diner, where the smell of burnt grease made my head spin, and weekends at a retail store, smiling at polite customers. Sleep became a luxury. Studying, an exhausting marathon I ran in a state of constant fatigue. My grades, of course, suffered, but I managed. I paid every bill, every fee, myself, without a single cent from home. One damp night in my 3rd year, I came home after a particularly long shift. The hallway was dark, but a soft light spilled from the living room, accompanied by muffled voices. Dad and Karen were there. They hadn't heard me come in. Frozen in the darkness, cold keys in my hand, I became an unwitting witness to their conversation. "I'm so glad Martha got that scholarship." Karen's voice sounded sweet and satisfied. "Can you imagine if we had to pay for her, too?" "I know," my father replied without a hint of doubt, and his words pierced my heart sharper than any knife. She was always a problem, always creating difficulties and expenses. At least the other two were worth the investment. I stood frozen in the dark hallway, turning into a silent statue, my heart echoing with the terrible revelation. My own father, the man whose love once seemed unshakable, considered me a problem, a burden, not worth the investments he so generously poured on someone else's daughters. Those words were forever etched in my memory, cold and sharp like shards of glass. I never brought it up, never made a scene, never confronted them. I just buried that pain deep inside, walled it up under a layer of silent dignity, and kept working as if nothing had happened. After college, I plunged headfirst into a career as a programmer. It was my world, my fortress, built from logic and algorithms where everything obeyed common sense, not a stepmother's whims. I was good at it, very good. I stayed late at the office until the city outside grew quiet, sinking into the night. But just making a living wasn't enough for me. I craved true independence, the kind bought not just by labor, but by intellect. I voraciously studied everything I could about investments, capital movements, and started trading on the stock market. Timidly at first, then with increasing confidence. Then my new frontier became cryptocurrency, a wild, unpredictable digital ocean. I spent sleepless nights studying intricate charts, analyzing trends, and making carefully calculated trades. At first, I lost money, tasting the bitter flavor of failure. But I learned from every mistake, tempering not just my character, but my strategy. Eventually, luck smiled on me. I started winning. Big wins followed one after another, bringing in money I never dared to dream existed. And 6 months ago, a miracle happened, crafted by my own hands. I bought a house. Not just a place to live, not square meters, but a beautiful lakeside house, nestled in greenery. 4 bedrooms, a spacious living room with a fireplace, a modern kitchen with panoramic windows, and a wraparound porch with a view of the water. The kind of place I read about in books during the hardest years, and quietly cherished deep inside. When, not without inner trepidation, I told my family about the purchase, they seemed impressed, to my surprise. Even Karen, whose face usually expressed only cold politeness, made a few restrained but positive comments, which was an extraordinary rarity. Inspired by this, what I then perceived as a thaw, I decided to invite them all for Christmas. A naive, indestructible hope spoke within me, to show them what I had achieved without their help, and perhaps to restore some part of the relationship that had been so ruthlessly damaged. I gave my father a set of spare keys and $3,000 in cash for groceries and decorations, trusting him as never before. He promised that he and Karen would arrange everything perfectly. They would handle the shopping, cooking, and decorating. All I had to do was arrive on Christmas Eve, bringing the gifts. "Don't worry about a thing," he said, and familiar paternal notes sounded in his voice. "We'll make everything perfect." And I, like a trusting child, believed him. Christmas Eve arrived. I loaded the trunk of my car with carefully selected gifts and exquisite holiday treats. Special desserts, expensive wine, groceries I had chosen myself, with love and thoughts of them. The 2-hour drive to the lake house passed in a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation. The house looked magical from the outside, as if it had stepped off a Christmas card. Garlands twinkled on the porch, a lush wreath adorned the door, and cozy smoke rose from the chimney into the frosty air. Through the large window, I saw a decorated Christmas tree shining with hundreds of lights. With relief and joy, I picked up the first bag of gifts and approached the front door. I knocked, expecting it to be opened with smiles and hugs. The door opened slightly, but only on the chain, and through the crack I saw only a narrow strip of Madison's face. "What are you doing here?" she asked, without a trace of greeting. "What do you mean? It's Christmas Eve. This is my house." Her voice sounded cold and alienated. "We decided we want to spend Christmas only with real family, without you." A burst of laughter came from inside. I recognized Karen's voice, Ashley's giggle, my father's laugh, and another male voice, Brandon, Madison's fiancé. "Madison, this is my house. I bought it. You can't—" But she rudely interrupted me. "Bye, Martha." The door slammed shut right in my face. I was left standing in the piercing cold, a useless bag of gifts in my frozen hand, staring at my own front door. My house, the one I paid for with money earned through years of hard, relentless labor. The one I had invited them to myself, and they had thrown me out. The temperature was dropping relentlessly, and the first snowflakes began to fall slowly from the sky. And I, standing on my own porch, could hear the sounds of merriment coming from behind the door. They were laughing, enjoying the warmth, the food, and the Christmas atmosphere. Everything that had been paid for by me. I took a deep breath, feeling the icy air burn my lungs. Then, with utmost calm, devoid of panic or anger, only cold, steely resolve, I took out my phone and dialed the police. "I'd like to report an illegal occupation of my property," I said in an even voice. The female dispatcher asked for details. Calmly and thoroughly, I explained the situation, gave the address, and confirmed that I had all the necessary ownership documents saved on my phone. Digital copies of everything: deeds, sales contracts, tax reports, everything that had legal force. "Officers are on their way, ma'am," the dispatcher replied. "Stay outside and wait for them." I returned to my car, slamming the door to shelter from the biting wind. Through the fogged-up window, as if through a frame of someone else's family portrait, I watched them. In my house, behind my windows, an idyllic scene was unfolding. Karen was gracefully pouring my wine into glasses, wine bought with those same $3,000. Ashley was laughing happily, reacting to a joke from Brandon. My father, with a focused expression, was carving something that looked like a huge turkey on the table. And Madison, with an ingratiating smile, was arranging gifts under the tree, the very ones I had so lovingly chosen for each of them. They looked absolutely happy, cozily settled in the very heart of my world, which I had created and paid for with money I had provided them. That picture was a perfect illustration of my exile. About 20 minutes later, cutting through the night's silence, 2 police cars arrived, their flashing lights casting alarming crimson reflections on the snow. 2 officers got out of the cars. Their faces, despite the festive evening, expressed focused, professional seriousness. "Are you the owner of this property?" the first one asked, his voice even and emotionless. "Yes," I replied, feeling a strange calm. "I have all the documents here." I handed over my phone, and they leaned over the screen, carefully studying the digital copies of the deed, comparing the data on my ID with the documents, confirming the address. One of them exchanged a brief look with his partner and nodded. "It's your property, no questions about it." "They won't let me in," I explained, and my voice sounded firm. "My stepsister stated they want to celebrate Christmas without me, in my own house." The officer raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Well, let's sort this out." They headed to the front door and knocked. Not like guests, but firmly, officially, with that knock which unmistakably heralds the end of any celebration. The door was opened by Brandon. His smug face instantly turned pale when he saw the police uniforms. "Good evening, sir. We need to speak with everyone in the house." Brandon silently stepped back, and the officers crossed the threshold. I remained behind them, in the doorway, watching the unfolding scene. Karen emerged from the kitchen, still holding a glass of wine. Seeing the officers, she immediately put on a mask of a concerned and slightly offended homemaker. "Officers, what seems to be the problem? This is just a minor family misunderstanding." The first officer shook his head, his gaze unwavering. "Ma'am, this isn't a family matter. This is illegal entry and occupation of private property. This house belongs to this woman." He pointed at me. The mask on Karen's face slipped, twisting into a grimace of anger and disbelief. "But we're family. She invited us herself." I took a step forward, emerging from the shadows. I invited you to celebrate Christmas with me, not to throw me out of my own house. Madison explicitly told me you wanted to celebrate only with real family, and that I am not part of it. At that moment, my father appeared in the doorway. He was clearly shocked to see me with the police. "Martha, what the hell is going on?" "You locked your own daughter out of her house. That's what's happening." Karen, feeling the ground slipping from under her, tried to change tactics. She smiled sweetly, attempting to charm the officers. "Officer, I assure you this is all a huge misunderstanding. We were just getting everything ready for her arrival. We never intended to exclude her." But the officer interrupted her, his voice leaving no room for discussion. "Ma'am, we have confirmed ownership. This property belongs to her. You have 5 minutes to gather your personal belongings and vacate the premises. If you refuse, we will be forced to arrest everyone for trespassing." The blood drained from Karen's face. Ashley, hearing this, ran into the room in a panic. Madison and Brandon stood motionless, as if rooted to the spot. 5 minutes, the officer repeated coldly. "The clock is ticking." The house, which a minute ago was filled with coziness and merriment, descended into chaos. Karen began frantically grabbing her and others' belongings, her movements sharp and disorderly. Ashley burst into tears, sobbing about the injustice. Madison screamed that you can't treat family like this. Brandon looked completely lost. My father, snapping out of his stupor, approached me. "Martha, please, can't we talk this over?" 5 minutes, Dad. Gather your things." "I'm sorry. I didn't know Madison would say that to you." "You didn't know?" My voice trembled, but not from doubt, but from bitterness. "You were sitting there, in the warmth, laughing with them, while your daughter stood in the cold, on Christmas Eve, at the door of her own house." He opened his mouth to object, but the officer politely but firmly stepped between us. "Sir, you need to gather your belongings now or leave without them." They scurried around like frightened cockroaches, throwing clothes into bags, grabbing phones and wallets. Karen muttered something under her breath about outrageous behavior. Ashley was still crying, but more quietly now. Madison, passing by the tree, started collecting some of her gifts. And, walking past me, she leaned in so close I could feel her breath. "You'll regret this," she hissed. But her voice had a distinct tremble. It wasn't a confident threat. It was just a weak, empty breath of despair. My father was the last to leave, dragging out his farewell as if hoping for a miracle. On the threshold, he turned to me one last time, and his eyes held a heavy, genuine sorrow. "Martha, I am truly sorry," he said, and his words hung in the frosty air, too late and too lightweight to bear the burden of the past years. I looked him straight in the eye, not allowing myself to flinch, and in that moment, through all the hurt, a bitter truth broke through. "You were always like this," I said quietly but clearly. "You always chose them over me, your new shiny family, and I remained just an inconvenient leftover from your first life." He didn't argue, didn't try to justify himself. He just nodded, sadly, almost like an old man, and lowering his head, trudged to the waiting car. The officers escorted them to their cars, making sure the whole company left the property and disappeared around the bend, taking their flawed celebration with them. When the police returned to me, their faces had softened. "It's all right, ma'am. They won't be back tonight," the senior one assured me. "But if anything happens, if they show up again, call us immediately." They drove away, and I was finally left in complete, deafening silence, alone on the threshold of my house. I stepped over the threshold and was enveloped by the warmth they had tried to usurp. Logs were crackling softly as they burned down in the fireplace. The tree, decorated with meticulous, hypocritical care, still shone with hundreds of lights. The air was thick and saturated with the aromas of expensive food and pine needles. Everything looked flawless, like a picture from a glossy magazine. They had indeed done a good job, those skillful directors of my humiliation, generously spending my $3,000. I dropped the bags with gifts on the floor, gifts that never found their recipients, and sank onto the sofa. A deep, almost ringing silence settled in the house, broken only by the soothing crackle of the fire. And then my gaze fell on an object tucked between the folds of the sofa cushions. It was a phone. Karen's phone. In her panicked rush, she had forgotten it, this digital chronicle of her hypocrisy. I picked up the cold gadget. The screen lit up, and it had no lock, no password. It was completely open, as if fate itself was giving me the key to their secret world. I knew I shouldn't do it, that it was an invasion of privacy. But after what they had done to me today, I didn't care about their privacy. With a trembling finger, I opened the messenger. At the top of the chat list was a group chat with a name that suggested close friendship, Karen and her friends. I started reading from the beginning. The first messages dated back to that very evening when I, full of naive hope, told the family about buying the house. Karen immediately, without delay, wrote to her friends. My stepdaughter Martha is bragging about buying some house with money from the stock market. Wants us all to spend Christmas there, paying for everything herself. What an insufferable upstart, always trying to impress with her money, as if that makes her any more significant. I scrolled further down, sinking into the swamp of her revelations. Message after message, spanning weeks. She naively thinks buying a fancy house will finally make us accept her. Still the same desperate girl vainly trying to fit into someone else's family. At least she's giving us money to organize the holiday. At least there's some practical use from her. And then I found what I was looking for. A message sent a few hours before my arrival. We're heading to the lake house. We'll settle in before Martha arrives. When she shows up, after paying for everything, we'll just tell her there's only room for real family here. We'll put her out the door and we can finally have a normal Christmas without outsiders. They had planned it, coldly and calculatedly. Take my money, occupy my house, and then, like a useless thing, throw me out. I sat, unable to tear myself away from the screen, reading message after message. Years of concealed resentment, quiet mockery, and outright cruelty, all neatly documented in this digital diary of malice. I put the phone down and stared into the fireplace fire, feeling a cold, steely rage boiling inside. Then I took my own phone and dialed my friend Olivia's number. Hi, Martha. Merry Christmas Eve. Her voice sounded warm and cheerful. Olivia, something's happened, I said, and my voice was surprisingly even. Can you come to the lake house and bring Michael, Emma, and Jake if they're free? I need my real family, right now. Of course, we're on our way, she replied, without a hint of doubt. I hung up and looked around the house that had almost been desecrated. It was time to cleanse it, to make it mine again. While waiting for my friends, I began methodically erasing every trace of my so-called family's presence. I went to the fireplace, where 7 Christmas stockings hung on the mantelpiece. 7. One for each participant in their little conspiracy. Karen, my father, Madison, Ashley, Brandon, and probably 2 more for future guests or just for symmetry. I took down 6 of them, leaving only 1, mine, hanging in solitary pride. Then I threw those 6 symbols of hypocritical unity into the fire and watched as the flames eagerly licked the velvet, turning it into black ash. It was bitter, but satisfying. I walked through the house, collecting everything that reminded me of them. Their glasses with unfinished wine, their plates, their meaningless trinkets arranged with feigned nonchalance. By the time Olivia's car, headlights illuminating the snow-covered driveway, pulled up to the house, it had already begun to transform. It became different, cleaner, more spacious, more mine. The air, having displaced the foreign smells, filled with silence and calm. Olivia burst through the door first, bringing a whirlwind of energy and care, followed closely by Michael, Emma, and Jake, huddled together. Their faces showed genuine concern. "What happened, dear?" Olivia exhaled, wrapping me in a strong, reliable hug in which the icy shell encasing my heart began to melt. And I told them everything, without embellishment, without holding back, releasing the accumulated pain. I told them about the slammed door, about Madison's words cutting me off from the real family, about the police arriving, and finally about the ominous find, Karen's phone, this digital vault full of poisonous revelations. Michael's face, usually calm and focused, darkened as I told the story. He, who worked at a prestigious law firm specializing in civil disputes, had seen a lot of baseness in his time, but even he looked on with unconcealed disgust. "Can I see that phone?" he asked in a businesslike tone. I silently handed him the ill-fated gadget. He settled into an armchair and began carefully studying the correspondence, his expression becoming increasingly stern and impenetrable with each scroll. Meanwhile, Emma and Jake, without wasting time, moved to the kitchen and started reheating the leftover holiday food, filling the house with familiar, cozy aromas. Olivia settled next to me on the sofa, not letting go of my hand. Her warm presence, the best balm. "You know what we're going to do tonight?" she said, and determined sparks flashed in her eyes. "We're going to have the most real, most heartfelt Christmas. Just us, your real family." And for the first time that endlessly long and difficult evening, I truly smiled, feeling a heavy stone roll off my soul. We had an impromptu dinner. We laughed until we cried, told funny stories from the past, shared plans, drank the wine I had brought. The house, which had recently been a stage for a hypocritical performance, filled with sincere, living warmth and genuine happiness. There was no place for pretense here. No need to walk a tightrope, constantly looking back and afraid of saying too much. There were only friends, closer than blood, those who cared for each other without any conditions. After dinner, Michael returned to the living room with a notepad covered in neat notes. "I have a plan," he declared, and steel notes sounded in his voice. "These messages are pure gold. They are undeniable proof of premeditated conspiracy. They took your money, used your house, and intentionally excluded you. This at least falls under fraud and theft of services." "And what do you suggest?" I asked, feeling a long-forgotten firmness awakening within me. "We send them an official pre-trial demand for full compensation of all your expenses. Those $3,000 plus compensation for moral damages and legal costs. We'll attach excerpts from their own correspondence as irrefutable evidence. And if they dare to ignore it..." Michael smiled coldly, and steel flashed in his gaze. "Then we go public. Your father, as I recall, holds a high position in a large corporation, right? Such companies are very protective of their reputation. And Karen, if I'm not mistaken, heads the board of trustees of a charity foundation. They also value their public image highly. We'll send the information to both organizations. Let them try to explain to their colleagues and partners why they deceived and threw their own daughter and stepdaughter out into the cold." I pondered his words. The plan was ruthless, even cruel. But then a picture rose before my mind's eye. Me, standing on the threshold of my own house in the icy darkness, and Madison's voice indifferently cutting me off from happiness. "Do it," I said quietly, but clearly. We spent the rest of the evening meticulously preparing the letter. Michael, with his characteristic professionalism, drafted a text saturated with references to specific legal statutes and explaining all possible legal consequences. We attached carefully selected, the most damning screenshots of the correspondence. The final demand was categorical: full compensation within 7 days. The next day, Christmas, passed surprisingly peacefully and calmly. My friends had stayed overnight, and we spent it relaxing carelessly by the fireplace, watching favorite movies and enjoying each other's company. There was no drama, no tension, only a deep, soothing harmony. After they left, alone with myself, I made one more final decision. The house was beautiful, but now its walls held echoes of bitter memories. I didn't want to keep it for myself any longer. I contacted a real estate agency specializing in luxury rentals. "It's a magnificent property," the agent said respectfully. "Lake view, 4 bedrooms, modern amenities. We can offer it at premium rates for affluent clients looking for luxurious vacation homes." "Perfect," I replied, looking out the window at the snowy landscape. "Arrange it." A few days after Christmas, as the city slowly returned to its usual rhythm, the letter was sent. We sent it by registered mail with return receipt requested, so no one could doubt that the addressees had held it in their hands. Both my father and Karen had to sign for it personally. And then it began. The first to call, as I expected, was my father. I didn't pick up, letting the call end by itself. He called again and again, persistently and desperately, dozens of times over the next few days. I just silently watched as my phone screen lit up with his name again and again, and listened to the vibration fade. Then came the text messages, a whole barrage, hitting me from all sides. From Karen: "This is outrageous and unworthy. How dare you threaten us with such vile things?" From Madison: "You are destroying this family with your own hands. I hope you're proud of what you've done." From Ashley: "Martha, please, let's just talk like adults. This is going way too far." From my father: "Martha, I beg you, answer me. We need to discuss this situation. I'm asking you." The tone of the messages changed throughout the week, as if they were trying all available tactics, from furious threats to obsequious pleas. Karen shifted from accusations of monstrous ingratitude to timid requests for leniency. Even Madison, whose voice usually rang with self-confidence, now wrote with notes of fright. I maintained my silence, not dignifying any calls or texts with a response, leaving not the slightest opening for discussion. Finally, I sent one single message, addressed exclusively to my father. From this point forward, all communication with me will be conducted exclusively through my official representative. Attached are the contact details of my attorney. I attached Michael's work coordinates. And that was it. No lengthy explanations, no hint of a possibility for dialogue. Just the cold, insurmountable professional distance. The 7 days allotted for consideration expired. On the 5th day, I got a call from Michael. They made contact, want to meet, agree to the payment, tomorrow at my office at 10 sharp. "I'll be there," I replied shortly. I spent that night in my city apartment, thinking about what I would say to them at the meeting. A part of my soul, still wounded and deceived, longed to scream all the accumulated pain in their faces, to tell them about the deep wound they had inflicted on me all these years. But another, stronger part simply wanted one thing: for it to be over. In the end, I decided to keep it simple and dignified. I would take the money owed to me, say goodbye forever, and move forward on my own path. My phone vibrated again. Another message. This time from Madison. "Please, don't go through with this. We can work it out. We're family." I reread those lines twice, then deleted them without regret. Family? They kept throwing that word around mindlessly, having not the slightest idea of its true, deep meaning. Tomorrow, I would show them clearly what their pathetic, twisted version of family had ultimately cost them. The law firm's office, where I arrived with a little time to spare, breathed with style, understated luxury, and impeccable professionalism. Precisely at 10, to the second, the door to the conference room opened. My father entered first, hunched over, followed closely by Karen, like a shadow. They looked crushed and haggard. None of them, it seemed, had known peace in the last few days. My father's hands trembled noticeably as he lowered himself into a chair. Karen was trying with her last strength to maintain her usual mask of composure, but that mask was cracking, revealing nervous tension. Even her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the deep fatigue and fear lurking in her eyes. Michael, with a polite but impersonal gesture, indicated 2 free chairs opposite us. They sank into the seats, and in this simple seating arrangement, the entire symbolic rift between us was felt. "Let's begin," Michael said, his voice a clean, professional instrument, devoid of any personal notes. "You received our official letter. Do you understand the demands put forward?" Karen was the first to break, her composure bursting like a soap bubble. "This is blatant blackmail," she blurted out, her voice shaking with indignation. "You are blackmailing us with these dirty threats." Michael didn't even bat an eye, remaining the embodiment of icy calm. "No, Mrs. Peterson, this is a perfectly legal demand for damages. Your stepdaughter provided you with $3,000 in cash and unlimited access to her private property. You used both, and then intentionally and cynically excluded her from her own dwelling on a holiday evening. Such actions fall under statutes for fraud and theft of services. And the correspondence on your own phone is irrefutable evidence of premeditated conspiracy. Karen's face flushed a deep crimson. Those messages were private. This is an invasion of privacy, she tried to parry. You left your phone in her house, on her private, legally confirmed property, Michael countered, unwavering. Anything discovered there in the course of lawful use of the property falls under her jurisdiction and can be used as evidence. My father, without saying a word, reached into the inner pocket of his jacket with trembling, almost uncontrollable hands. He pulled out a thick envelope and placed it on the polished surface of the table with a dull thud. "The full amount," he whispered, and his voice broke. "Everything you demanded." Michael, without haste, opened the envelope and with professional dispassion counted the stack of bills. "Every dollar is accounted for." "Excellent," Michael concluded. "Now, let me remind you both of the further conditions. This financial matter is considered settled. However, digital copies of the correspondence remain in our possession, and if we receive the slightest signal of any retaliatory actions, attempts at unsanctioned contact with my client, dissemination of defamatory information about her, we will immediately send the full package of documents to the board of directors of your company, Mr. Peterson, and to the board of trustees of your charity foundation, Mrs. Peterson. I am sure the leadership will show a keen interest in the moral character of people representing their organizations." My father nodded with frightening haste, as if afraid his belated agreement wouldn't be recorded in time. Karen remained silent, but her jaws were clenched so tightly it seemed the bones would crack. We're sorry," my father finally squeezed out. "We are truly sorry for everything that happened." I looked at him carefully. His apology sounded strained and unnatural, like a learned lesson he had to repeat under Karen's watchful control. She, in turn, also spoke. "I also apologize," she said, and every word was measured and empty. "We went too far. It was wrong." Her voice was even, monotonous, completely devoid of sincere emotion. They were just words that she understood were expected of her. I rose from my chair. Michael instantly followed my example. "Goodbye," I said, and not a single note trembled in my voice. "I do not wish to see any of you again. Not you, not Madison, not Ashley. It's over." I turned around and, without looking back, walked out of the conference room. That same day, I went to a mobile phone salon. I had had this number for over 10 years, since college. Everyone had it, friends, colleagues, and of course, family. I changed it without a shadow of doubt. The new number became a symbol of a new start, a clean slate. I did not give it to my father or anyone in his circle. It was finished with them forever. The subsequent weeks passed slowly and incredibly calmly. The lake house, thanks to the agency's efforts, began to generate a steady rental income. Affluent clients were delighted with the views, seclusion, and high level of comfort. A decent sum arrived in my account every month. I focused on my career, on communicating with real friends, on building my own separate and independent life. Months passed, flowing smoothly one into another, filled with the quiet rhythm of a new life. And I began to feel an unfamiliar strength growing within me, a confidence rising from the depths of my soul, as if I had finally shrugged off an unbearable burden I had been carrying without complaint for all those 15 long years, without even realizing its monstrous weight. Then one inconspicuous evening, as I was returning from work, tired but content, I saw him. My father was standing at the entrance to my residential complex, a lone, stooped figure, lost and out of place against the backdrop of the faceless concrete walls. My first, almost reflexive impulse was to walk past, to pretend I didn't notice his existence. But he managed to catch my eye before I could make any decision. "Martha, please, just 5 minutes." His voice sounded hoarse and pleading. "That's all I'm asking for." I should have turned around and left. All the arguments of reason, all the bitter experience screamed for me to leave him there in the twilight. But something in his face, in the new, deep network of wrinkles around his eyes, made me slow my step. He looked broken in a way I had never seen before, not even in the darkest days after my mother's death. "Not here," I said curtly, feeling everything inside me clench. "There's a cafe across the street." We crossed the street in oppressive, absolute silence, separated not by the pavement, but by a whole chasm of lived years. Inside, we found an isolated table in the very corner. He ordered black coffee, but just mechanically spun the cup in his hands, not touching the drink. I ordered tea and held the warm ceramic in my palms, as if seeking a point of support. "Say what you have to say," I said, and my own voice sounded detached and alien to me. He took a deep, ragged breath, and his eyes desperately gleamed with unshed tears. "I'm sorry for everything. Not just that nightmare on Christmas Eve, but absolutely everything. For making you pay for college yourself, while I spared nothing for the others. For all those years, I meekly chose Karen's daughters, pushing you into the background. For never being the father you rightly deserved." Tears finally broke through, slowly rolling down his cheeks, and he wiped them away with the back of his hand with its rough, calloused knuckles. I was weak. I was terrified of confronting Karen, her will, her manipulations. I was afraid she would leave me, and I would be left again in that deafening, all-consuming emptiness, like back then, after your mother left. And so I agreed with everything she wanted, remained silent when necessary, even when it hurt you, especially when it hurt you. I listened, not uttering a single word, letting this confession pour out to the end. You deserved better. You deserved a father who would fight for you to the end, who would unconditionally put you first, who would tell you every day how proud he is of you and your strength. Instead, you got me. A coward who allowed another woman to treat his own flesh and blood like a nuisance. He looked up at me, and his eyes were red, swollen from tears. I am fully aware that I cannot turn back time and undo these 15 years of constant failure and betrayal. But I want you to know I see everything now with utmost painful clarity. Everything, down to the very bottom. And I am unbearably sorry. I sat in silence for a long time, digesting his every word, sifting them through the sieve of my own pain. A part of me, that same little girl left in the distant past, desperately wanted to hug him, to whisper that everything was all right. But everything was not all right, and cheap pretense would not heal either his wounds or mine. "I accept your apology," I finally uttered, and my voice sounded quiet but firm. But accepting an apology is not synonymous with forgiveness. Forgiveness is a long and thorny path that could take years. He just nodded silently, unable to object. "I do not want and will not see Karen, ever, under any circumstances. The same goes for Madison and Ashley. They are not my family. They never were and never will be." "I understand," he whispered. "And if you and I are to have any relationship in the future, it will be just you and me, alone, without outsiders, and we will move slowly in small, cautious steps. The pain you all caused me is still too fresh and sharp. It might take years before I can trust you again, even a little, if I ever can." He slowly reached his hand across the table and touched my hand with his fingertips. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't close my fingers around his either, leaving it lying motionless. "Take all the time you need. I will be here. I will wait until you are ready," he said. We finished our drinks in a heavy, but no longer so hostile silence. Then we got up and went outside. He left without looking back. No hugs, no loud promises, no false hopes. Just a fragile, barely born understanding hanging in the cool evening air. Now I live my life exclusively on my own terms, which I set for myself. The lake house, once a symbol of pain, now reliably generates a steady income, remaining a beautiful but distant backdrop. My work, built by my own labor, brings deep satisfaction and a sense of accomplishment. My friends, who have been through fire and water, have become my real, chosen family, whose love requires no sacrifices or humiliations. I am happy in a way I couldn't have imagined even in my wildest dreams. I have found peace. I voluntarily and consciously got rid of the toxic burden of pseudo-familial bonds and gained what is more precious than any wealth: genuine, unclouded freedom. We text occasionally with my father. Short, still timid messages, cautious steps towards each other through the thickness of years of distrust. Perhaps someday in the future, we will manage to build a new, healthy relationship. Or perhaps not. But I finally understood a simple and clear truth. In any case, whatever happens, I will be perfectly fine. For the first time in a decade and a half, I am truly, with my whole being, fine. And at this stage of my journey, that is more than enough.